Hi there, I'm Mabel Chan. We're back with Season 5 of One in a Billion. We kick off this season with a special series, True Colors. True Colors is about the color of our character, not our skin in times of crisis. How we respond reveals who we are and what we care about. First is the global pandemic spreading since the spring. Then is the social unrest this summer, following the terrifying killing of George Floyd. For years, our podcast has been focused on Asian people, culture, and society. But now, we want to include stories about the Black experience, because our country and the world are rising against racism.
This is obviously a lot more diverse. That makes me feel really good that a lot of people are taking ownership for this as our problem and not someone else's problem.
Something's different now. Enough people are saying enough is enough, and that's why things are changing.
These protests, as broadcast on the BBC World News, are going stronger and spreading wider.
What we're seeing is that a lot of people now see vividly and feel that there is a basic unfairness, that racism is alive and well and pernicious and persistent, and it is time to say no more.
That is Ron Claiborne, a veteran ABC News anchor and correspondent who retired just 2 years ago. Ron is African American. He grew up in the 1950s in Oakland, California, until he was 7 years old. Then he moved to LA, and he found himself surrounded by Japanese Americans during the first 2 years of elementary school. After that, his formative years in LA are mostly Black. For almost 6 years, Ron and I worked on many stories together at ABC News. But during those years, we hardly ever talked about race. Today, we're talking about being Black in America. Here's our conversation. Welcome to One in a Billion, Ron.
Thank you, Mabel. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Ron, I want to start the conversation by asking, how are you processing the protests against police brutality after George Floyd's death, not only here in America, but around the world?
It's been an amazing thing to see this on television. What impressed me the most, it's white people, Asians, Black people, a real cross-section of America taking part to an extent that surprised me. I thought it would be primarily African Americans in these protests. Also, the volume, just the sheer number of them in so many cities, the vehemence of them. And I'm not talking about the violence here. I'm talking about the enthusiasm, the energy, the commitment of these demonstrators is very, very impressive to see. The unfortunate aspect is that there have been a minority who have hijacked it in some cases and turned to violence, which make it easier for those who are critics of these demonstrations to label them all as violent and out of control. That is not the case based on what I have seen, what I have heard from people who participated in, and just by coincidence, I was out in New York City in Manhattan on my bicycle and happened to come across sort of the trailing members who were gathering for a demonstration, and there was an enthusiasm and energy, and as I said, this sense of commitment to a cause, the likes of which I haven't seen really since the civil rights movement protests when I was just a teenager. And it was just so many people, mostly young people, committed to a cause that is shaking this country to its foundations right now.
Why do you think that is, Ron? Why do you think that there are so many different types of people, so united, so devoted, in so many different parts of the world, beyond America?
That is a great question and one I've been giving a lot of thought to, and frankly, I don't have the answer. I'll say this. This has revealed a current of dissatisfaction and refusal to accept the status quo, which for some reason is touching people of all races and ethnicities, not just in Minneapolis, not just in the big cities of the U.S., but small cities too, small towns, towns where there is a negligible percentages of non-white citizens, and across the world. So what it suggests, I can only infer from what we're seeing, is that a lot of people now see vividly and feel that there is a basic unfairness, that racism is alive and well and pernicious and persistent, and it is time to say no more.
We all have seen at least once the video of George Floyd's neck underneath the knee of that white cop, Derek Chauvin, who is now charged with second-degree felony murder. And I couldn't watch more than 3 times. After that, I got to turn away. There's something that is burning me, that's cutting into me. What went through your mind when you first saw that video?
I mean, it is absolutely horrifying that it happened, that this man, this police officer, this human being could do that to another in public and so callously and nonchalantly. His hand is in his pocket. He's pressing his leg on the neck of this man who is pleading for his life, saying, "I can't breathe," pleading for his mother. And the astounding thing is, there are witnesses, bystanders, watching this happen, pleading with him, stop, you're killing this man. And this police officer doesn't care.
And his hands were handcuffed.
This was a cold, hard, callous, certainly murder of another human being with utter indifference to the humanity and the pleas and the desperation of this victim. This human beings, I had hoped, do not act this way.
Right.
And you can only do it, really, if you dehumanize another person. A human being cannot do this to another human being if you recognize that person as a human being. The only way you can treat someone like this is if you see them as unhuman, as subhuman. Most people wouldn't treat an animal that way. They wouldn't treat it. If you saw someone doing that to a dog on the street, most people would intervene and say, "Stop, what are you doing?"
Right, they would come after you with a stick.
Yeah, it would be unimaginably cruel to treat an animal this way, to treat another human being this way. I mean, it bespeaks to a level of viciousness that is sad and dispiriting to see.
Right, you're right about the power of a video in this case. It's so up close and personal. You're able to be there almost like watching what's going on as if you were bystanders. So my question here is the cry for justice. The legal response is so quick, right? They upgraded the charge against Derek Chauvin and they brought charges immediately against these other 3 cops. What does that signal to you? What does that tell you about the law enforcement system?
Well, I'll say this. The upgrading of the charges is certainly as much a political act as a legal act. I think there was a sense that third-degree murder, the original charge, was insufficient. Second-degree murder, which I believe has some intent involved, is going to be hard to convict this officer. It's going to be difficult to convict this officer. I remember the Rodney King. I was in Los Angeles based at that time. Rodney King video, which seemed to clearly show 4 police officers tasing and abusing an African American man, and a lot of people naively thought, well, this is obviously what they're doing. The video tells the story. Those officers were acquitted of state charges, all 4 of them. By no means do I have confidence yet that any of these officers will be convicted. That will be a test.
You don't think so?
Well, remember what happened to the officer who was involved in the Eric Garner case. The grand jury in New York City declined to indict him. Now, I watched that video. It's unimaginable that charges could not be pressed against that officer, given what we see and what we know about the circumstances there.
But the circumstances were different then than now in terms of the groundswell of public outcry. You're talking about people not just individually, companies as well are issuing statements. Cultural organizations and communities are issuing statements. Individuals are issuing statements and taking actions in social media. We're all standing in solidarity with the black people. Black lives matter.
I hope that justice is done.
What will be justice in this case, in your mind?
My opinion would be a conviction of certainly at least one of the officers who was applying the pressure to this poor guy's neck. Legal justice would be a conviction of all four officers under the statutes of the law. But justice in the larger sense, I think you're asking about is, what justice is brought in this country to people who have been denied justice for so long? Is it reforming policing? Is it reforming police departments? Is it defunding, which you're now hearing a lot about, police departments and redirecting at least some of those funds to social programs? Is it demilitarizing police forces? Justice in the largest sense is going to be a long-term project, the arc of justice that Martin Luther King talked about, the arc of bending towards justice. But it's evolutionary, not revolutionary. The time when this country truly lives up to its creed, its promise to all of its citizens for equality, opportunity, and fairness will be a process. Now, if I get the sense for really the first time in my life that what's happening, what we're seeing in these demonstrations is history, the pivot of history happening in real time.
A very good friend of mine, she is African-American lady, and she wrote me this. I'd like to remind people that those of us who are African-American are black every day. As sad and unnecessary as is the death of George Floyd, his is only the tip of the iceberg among those incidents which have been filmed. Nothing new under the sun, Ecclesiastes tell us. In what ways do you feel the same or different?
When I was 15 years old, I was in a car with a friend that was stopped by a police officer. This was in Los Angeles, where the officers made up an excuse that we had run some red lights, which was not correct. And the police officer told me to get out of the car, said something to me that I didn't understand. I remember this vividly. And I didn't hear what he said. And he pointed his gun at me and pulled the hammer back and then said, "I told you to put your hands up or I'll fill you full of holes." Terrified me. For years later, I would have recurring nightmares about being killed by the police. Only later, in retrospect, did I realize this may have been a case of PTSD. This happened 20 or 30 years. The threat to African Americans as an African American, not just from police, but from the larger majority, has always been something that is in the back of your mind, lurks in your head. What might happen? Is this person going to be a danger to me just because I exist as a non-white person? We as African Americans live constantly on guard against this, and it is exhausting. It is exhausting to live your life on guard against the possibility of being the victim of racism for your entire life.
How would you, Ron, characterize your actual living experience being black in America?
There is this kernel, seed, always in the back of your mind. If you're around white Americans, how is that person going to act toward me? How are they going to treat me? Are they going to turn on me? Are they going to say something nasty or vicious to me? Because it's always a possibility. I remember driving across country. This was years ago when I was moving from California to New York. I had driven straight from San Francisco to Denver, and I pulled off at a 7-Eleven to get something to drink. I was standing beside my car, and I heard this commotion down the road. And it was a car, and I could see there were some young women leaning out the window, and as they passed, they screamed in unison a foul racial epithet at me and started laughing. And I just remember, it's not just anger, it's the degradation and the humiliation that someone felt that they could do this to you. It's not just what they said to you, but that they felt that this was okay.
Were they drunk?
They weren't drunk. They were just having fun.
Oh, gosh.
They were just having fun. I think virtually every African American in this country can tell you some story of some slight or insult or abuse. When I lived in Chicago, in Lincoln Park, kind of a upper middle class area, lots of young professionals, and I would take the bus to the ABC bureau as the bus went along. It would pick up more and more people, and this happened again and again and again, would begin to fill up with people. Finally, the bus would become crowded, and the seat to my right and to my left would remain empty. It's worse than insulting. It is degrading. It is dehumanizing. It is painful. It is hurtful.
What sense does that make?
It doesn't.
Their point of view, what were they thinking? I would just grab the seat myself. When I see a seat, I would just sit down quickly.
I moved down to Hyde Park, on the south side of Chicago, where Barack Obama lived, which was much more progressive and certainly accepting and accommodating. I was forced from my home in Chicago in the late 20th century because I was made to feel unwelcome and uncomfortable in the neighborhood I had chosen to live. And that's bad. I'm a firm believer in the instinct of human beings towards group allegiance. And when you layer that in this country with the subliminal lesson that white people learn, that they have this privilege, as this woman in Central Park who called the police.
In that case, you're referring to Amy Cooper in Central Park.
The salient point was her knowing, probably this was unconscious, that if I call the police and I say there's an African-American man menacing me, you're in a lot of trouble, buddy. And she's right. The larger theme is that she is correct. If the police did show up, they probably would question this guy. Were you menacing her? Were you threatening her? Well, come with me. Explain yourself.
I want to show you something, a picture of a black boy saying, "Am I next?" This boy is holding the sign during a protest in downtown LA on May 29th, 2020. That was the protest over the death of George Floyd. What resonates with you when you see this picture?
It is sad. For a child to come up believing that the police could kill me and get away with it is a terrible way to live. It's a terrible burden. African American parents are teaching their children, if you have any encounter with police, watch your hands, watch what you say, don't give them any excuse to beat you or kill you. When you're encountering police officers or white people in large groups, that the seed of that thought is always there. Might this group turn against me?
Right.
Might they go after me? And they can get away with it.
Right. Well, we don't want them to get away with it. And then we want to look at reforming the police system. And therefore, in the case of Minneapolis, as you may have heard, the city council had already voted to not just defund the police, but dismantle it, right? That is drastic. Don't you find some hope in that?
The fact that these ideas are being seriously discussed, that is important. There seems to be a commitment early on still to a sustained effort supported by many, many Americans for real change, real reform, a new perspective. I mean, a year ago, except for a small number of people, no one was talking about defunding the police or reorganizing or reforming the police. So these are big ideas. They may not all work out, but the important thing is people are thinking in a new way.
How do we as non-Black rise to this challenge of anti-racism work? There's a lot of ideas out there, beginning with education. I've been given a list from many different sources about the history of Blacks in this country, as well as from my African-American friend. Do you have a list?
The beauty of this moment is that a lot of non-Black people are having this conversation. Tell me what I don't know. Tell me about these expenses. Expose yourself to people who can educate you. This is an important moment in history. I hope it lasts, because hundreds of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of people around the world are saying, I see it. There is a profound immoral wrong loose in this country and the world. It's not just the United States. We have to do something about it.
We are seeing corporate America. Many companies are taking a stand. In what ways can they address racist behavior in the workplace? I mean, can you think of any when you were at ABC News?
A big part of the problem is the discriminatory behavior and attitudes of people who consider themselves progressive, open-minded, liberals. Hey, we hired some black people. Okay. Well, it goes a lot deeper than that. At ABC News, you were there. The people running ABC News, the people at the highest levels, looked very similar to the way they did demographically 30, 40, 50 years ago. So when people in power who are white begin to share that power, then we will have made real progress. Real progress.
Thank you, Ron. Ron Claiborne, former anchor and correspondent for ABC News. In our next episode of True Colors,
I'm in an emergency training program, and I'm finishing my third year of 4 years of residency. And I found myself often crying behind my own mask, or, I would be on the verge of tears, and then I would have to suppress them because I knew that I needed to be in full control of myself and my ability to perform a procedure like putting someone on a ventilator.
That is Dr. Anita Chari at Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital, Finding Humanity in Emergency. That is our next episode in 2 weeks. 1 in a Billion is
Brian Latwinowicz,
Yvette Yu, Maggie She, Leah Yen Jarrett.
And our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.